The Rogue Elephant of Panapatti. Dear friends, this is the story of the rogue elephant of Panapatti in the lush and verdant forests of Wayanad, India. In the heart of the Nilgiri Hills, lay the tranquil village of Panapatti. Life in this remote hamlet was simple and serene, its inhabitants living in harmony with the surrounding wilderness. However, beneath this idyllic facade lurked a menace that would soon shatter the village's tranquility, a rogue elephant known as the Killer of Panapatti. An elephant with one whole tusk and one half tusk turns rogue in the Panapatti area and is responsible for multiple human deaths. News of the rogue elephant's rampage reached the ears of Kenneth Anderson, a renowned hunter who had made a name for himself by tracking down and eliminating man-eating tigers. Anderson, a man of unwavering courage and a deep respect for nature, felt compelled to intervene. He understood that the rogue elephant was not merely a predator but a creature in pain, driven to violence by its circumstances. Anderson first encounters the elephant when out trying to bag a peacock armed only with a shotgun. Anderson escapes unscathed, though the elephant goes on to attack a camp of people, causing the government to double its reward for the animal. The rogue elephant was a massive bull, a majestic creature that had once roamed freely among the herds of Wayanad. However, a series of unfortunate events had turned this gentle giant into a vengeful beast, driven by rage and a thirst for destruction. A violent encounter with a dominant tusker had left him scarred and embittered, his tusk broken and his spirit broken. Cast out from his herd, he wandered the forests alone, a pariah among his own kind. But what he lacked in stature he made up for in courage, cold calculating cunning, and an implacable hatred of the human race, whom he had evidently made it his ambition to decimate, as and when the opportunity presented itself. He had one tusk, about 18 inches long, while the other had been broken off short, by the big leader of the herd inhabiting the banks of the Kaveri River and the jungle fastnesses that comprised the forest block of Wodapatti, in which was situated the cattle pen of Panapatti, in the district of Salem. This youngster, before he became a rogue, had evidently been ambitious and was more than normally high-spirited, for he had thrust his unwelcome attentions upon the ladies of the herd under the very eyes of their lord and master. A warning scream of resentment and rage from the leader had had no salutary effect, and the youngster had offered battle when the tusker had attempted to drive him away. This had led to a major encounter, in which years, experience and greater weight had told heavily in favor of the leader. The youngster had eventually bolted, battered and beaten, with vicious gashes in his sides, inflicted by the powerful tusks of the bigger male, while one of his own tusks had been snapped off short in the fray, no doubt to give him bad toothache for many days to come. He had wandered in this condition, morose and surly, in the vicinity of the herd, but never daring to enter it, when one day, as he was walking down a forest cart track, he had turned a corner to come suddenly face to face with a buffalo cart, laden with bamboos that had been felled for the contractor. A blind rage had seized him at that moment, together with a deep urge to get his own back on something. Madly he rushed at the cart, and the driver just escaped by jumping off and fleeing for life. But the unfortunate buffaloes were yoked to the heavily laden vehicle and stood helpless to the onslaught. The rogue for rogue he had now become proceeded to smash the cart to matchwood, before turning his attentions on the buffaloes. One he seized by its long, curving horn, and flung bodily down the embankment that bordered the track, where it was found next day with its horn torn out from the roots. One of its 4 legs had suffered a compound fracture, and the broken, exposed bone had dug itself into the soft earth with the force of the fall, so that the weight of the animal effectively anchored it to the spot. The remaining buffalo it had gored with its one tusk, but this animal had bolted down the track, dragging the broken yoke of the cart behind it, and so escaped the fate of its less fortunate companion. Thereafter, the elephant steadily worsened his reputation, and many an unfortunate wayfarer to the river had gone to his death beneath its massive feet or, caught by that terrible trunk, had been beaten to pulp against the bole of a forest tree. My first experience with this animal was by accident. I had gone down to Hoganakal, on the banks of the Kaveri River and about 4 miles from Panapatti, for a weekend's Moser fishing, and to secure a crocodile if opportunity presented. As rumor had it, at that time the rogue was not in the locality, having crossed the river to the Coimbatore bank in wake of the elephant herd which had wandered there in search of fresh pasture. In the evening of the second day, after having met with indifferent fishing, I had returned to the forest lodge for tea, when the call of a peacock close at hand had tempted me to go after the bird, which I hoped would make me a tasty roast for that night's dinner. Slipping a couple of number 1 shot into the breech of my shotgun, I cut diagonally across the forest to the glen where the peacock was calling. Reaching it, I stepped cautiously forward in an effort to locate my quarry, eventually arriving at the dry bed of the China Stream, a tributary of the Kaveri River, which adjoined a mile further down. My rubber-soled boots made no noise on the soft sand. One could hear the rustle of the peacock's feathers as it preened its tail somewhere behind the bushes on the opposite bank, and was just tiptoeing across the stream, when a shrill, trumpeting blast smote the silence, to be followed by the crashing bulk of the rogue as it broke cover 50 yards away and swiftly bore down on me. Realizing the futility of attempting to escape by running away, for elephants can cover ground at an astonishing speed, and I had no chance of outdistancing him, because of the hampering soft sand and clinging thorny shrubs of the neighboring jungle. I covered the curled trunk in the sights of my shotgun and fired both barrels at a range of about 30 yards. The noise of the report and the stinging missiles stopped him momentarily, and, while he screamed with rage and defiance, I fled up the path by which I had come, carrying my empty gun, at a pace I had never thought myself capable of attaining. Arriving at the forest bungalow, I seized my rifle and ran back again. But there was nothing to be seen on the deserted sands of the China Stream, and upon approaching the spot I found the rogue had swerved into the forest on the opposite side, where I did not care to follow him, as night was approaching. The next day I had to return to Bangalore on business, and could not possibly extend my stay, so I left the honors of the first round entirely to the rogue of Panapatti. This creature, through his notoriety, had been declared as an undesirable or rogue elephant by the government, and official notification had been broadcast by the Forest Department, both in print and locally by beat of drum, or tom-tom asterisk as it is officially called, offering a government reward of Rs.500 for its destruction. An Indian gentleman of the locality then very bravely determined to put an end to the elephant's career and claim the reward. The details of his attempt as I later pieced it together were as follows. Armed with a .500 double-barreled black powder express rifle, which had seen better days, he arrived at Panapatti and was told that the elephant was wandering in the adjacent Wadapati forest block. The same China Stream on the bed of which, near Hoganakal, I had nearly met my end beneath the monster's feet, curves gracefully past Panapatti and meanders through the forest, its northwestern bank forming the boundary of the Wadapati Reserve, and its opposite bank that of the Pentagram Block. The Indian gentleman of whom I am speaking, having tried for 2 days, without success, to meet the rogue, spent the night of the third day in his tent about 2 miles within the Pentagram Block, away from the China Stream and the Wadapati Range, out of which the elephant was said never to stray. But as a precaution he had his followers build a ring of campfires around their 2 tents, and the men were given instructions to keep plenty of firewood in reserve for replenishing and stoking the fires during the night watches. All then being peaceful, he apparently fell fast asleep, so, evidently, did his followers. In the early hours of the morning the rogue came upon this peaceful scene. The fires had perhaps died low, with just their embers glowing. Normally, no elephant or any other animal will go anywhere near a fire. But the sight of the white tent and the urge to destroy proved too strong for this beast, for he carefully made his way through at a point where there was no fire and rushed upon the tent with a scream of rage. The camp followers awoke at the pandemonium created and, realizing the demon was upon them, scattered and fled in all directions. The unfortunate occupant of the white tent had no chance to use his time-worn express. The structure fell about his ears and was trampled flat beneath the huge bulk of the elephant, which then proceeded to tear it to ribbons. It was while engaged in this congenial task that it came upon the hunter, alive or dead at that time, nobody knows. Curling its dreaded trunk around him, it carried him off in triumph to the clearing of a forest line which passed nearby. There it literally rubbed him into the ground beneath its huge feet, till nothing remained of the human body but a pulpy mass of bloody flesh and crushed bones, mixed with sand from the forest line. Finally, not liking the smell of blood, it tossed the bloody mass far away and returned to the fastnesses of the Panapatti block. As a result of this incident, the government reward was doubled to Rs.IOO/dash, while I determined to begin my second round against the elephant. Arriving at Panapatti, I visited the scene of the recent tragedy, where I could not help wondering at the audacity of the bloodthirsty elephant in actually penetrating the circle of fires. The spot nearby, where it had rubbed its victim into the ground, was also clearly evident, although the remains had long since been demolished by vultures. Returning to Panapatti, I requisitioned the aid of one of the cattlemen from the adjoining cattle pen, who was also a fair tracker, to help me find the animal. Tracks there were plenty across the sands of the China Stream, but the problem was to find and follow one that had been freshly made. This it was impossible to do, for the good reason that the elephant had evidently made off from the vicinity, and was either somewhere within the Panapatti block, or had wandered across the low hills to the main Kaveri River, which flowed, as I have stated, some 4 miles away. The Panapatti bank was clothed, for a couple of miles down the China Stream, with a species of tall flowering grass, whose roots subsist on subsoil moisture and which attained a height of 10 feet in places, topped by beautiful heads of flowering stems which somewhat resembled the flowering heads of cane sugar, but were of greater length and much finer texture. In the early mornings, droplets of dew, which had gathered overnight on the fine strands of these flowering heads, glittered in the rays of the rising sun, giving a fairy-like appearance to the graceful fronds and a vision of beauty and peace which entirely belied the danger that threatened upon entering the grassy belt. The stems had grown to such height and thick profusion that one could not see more than a yard ahead, and to walk through the grass one had to part the stems with one hand, holding the rifle in the other. A herd of elephants might have lurked within, and nothing could have been seen of them until almost within touching distance. The tracks made by the rogue in his previous excursions were marked by crushed and bent stems, and even these were rapidly reassuming their upright positions. The grass belt varied in width from 100 to 200 yards. As the hills at this point abutted the China Stream, the jungle was represented by giant bamboo, traversing which was almost as dangerous as crossing the flowering grass. Fallen bamboos lay in profusion everywhere, their spiky ends impeding both advance and retreat. The tall boughs, clothed with their feathered leaves, curved gracefully overhead, bending and creaking to the forest breezes. We spent 4 whole days searching for the elephant, laboriously traversing the grass belt and the bamboos, crossing the range of foothills and descending their further slopes till the purling waters of the Kaveri River flowed past our feet as it hastened to the falls and cataracts at Hoganakal, the great Medar Dam some 35 miles downstream, then the eastern plain of Erode and the city of Trichinopoly, and finally the distant Bay of Bengal. In all this time, never a fresh track of the rogue did we see. The afternoon of the 5th day found my guide and myself again on the banks of the Kaveri River, when I decided to follow the bank upstream in the hope of finding some trace of my quarry. We had advanced with considerable difficulty about 3 miles, stepping over the giant roots of the tall muddy trees that clothed the bank and ran down into the water for sustenance, interspersed with breaks of tall flowering grass, when we came upon the fresh tracks of an elephant which had evidently crossed the river early that morning from the opposite bank of the Coimbatore district. Rough measurements revealed that they tallied with the spoor of the rogue. Tracking now became easy, for we had a definite trail to follow, and the footprints and heavy bulk of the elephant had made a clear path through grass, bamboo, and undergrowth. The spoor led up and across a small foothill, near the top of which we came upon a heap of dung. Although quite fresh, this lacked that warmth to the touch which would have shown that it had been very recently cast. So we followed on, down into a deep valley. Here we found still fresher dung, but not warm to the touch, which showed that our quarry was yet some distance ahead. We struggled up the adjoining slope and across 2 more foothills, and then observed that the track suddenly slewed round and made back in the general direction of the Kaveri River. We were overcome by a fear that the animal had escaped us by returning across the Kaveri. Going forward as fast as possible, we came upon another heap of dung together with the mark of urine which had soaked into the ground. But this time minute traces of froth showed in the sand and the dung was warm to the touch. At last our quarry was not very far ahead, nor was the Kaveri River. Our further progress turned almost into a race to reach the river at the same time as the elephant, and before it crossed out of rifle range. From fallen branches, oozing with freshly flowing sap, we could observe that the pachyderm was grazing casually as it approached the river. Finally, a sharp dip in the land and a murmur of sound told us that we had almost reached the river's bank, and soon the glint of water between tree stems told us that we were there. Silently and cautiously we crept forward. The sand became soft. Then we noticed that the elephant, instead of crossing as we had feared, had changed its mind and walked upstream and across a grassy bank. Here it was apparent that the spoor was very recent, for the tender blades of grass were fast embedded in the moist ooze, from which bubbles of air burst before our eyes. We had gone another 150 yards when we observed that a creek lay ahead, and as we came abreast of it we heard the noise of splashing and the hollow sound of air being blown through an elephant's trunk. Our quarry was having a bath. Fortunately, the little breeze that blew was in our direction, and as we parted the intervening twigs and stems of grass, we saw an elephant lying on its side in the water, but facing away from us. In this position, it was impossible to tell whether the animal was the rogue, or a wandering elephant from among the several herds that inhabited both banks of the river. So we settled down to watch. After a further 5 minutes of snorting, blowing and splashing, the animal suddenly rose and began to walk in a leisurely way across the creek. In all this time it had not shown its head, nor had we been able to see whether it had 2 tusks, or a broken stump at one side. The situation now called for early decision, as once the elephant reached the thick verdure clothing the opposite bank of the creek, it would be lost to view. So I snapped my thumb and finger twice in quick succession. The sound, infinitesimal as it must have been, penetrated the keen hearing of the elephant. With a swish and a swirl of water it spun around, and there before us stood the rogue of Panapatti, the stump of his broken left tusk clearly in view, while the right tusk, small as it was, curved viciously upwards. Within a second his small eyes located us, his trunk curled inwards, and with his head raised and his small tail sticking out ridiculously, screaming with triumph and hate, he charged across the intervening water, bent on yet another lustful killing. My .405 spoke once, the heavy solid bullet speeding straight to its mark beneath the coiling trunk and into the throat. The animal stopped dead in its tracks, while a gout of blood spurted from the severed jugular. It turned sideways in an attempt to make off, when 2 more rounds both found their marks in vital places, one in the soft depression of the temple, and the other behind the huge ear as it flapped forward. The great bulk stood still, then shivered as if stricken with terrible ague, and finally collapsed, as if poleaxed, in the shallow waters of the creek, which rapidly became reddened with blood, as the rays of the late afternoon sun vanished beneath the rim of the towering peak of Mount Panapatti Malai on the Coimbatore bank, sending streaks of crimson light into the orange sky. News of the rogue elephant's death spread like wildfire through Panapatti, bringing relief and jubilation to the villagers. They hailed Anderson as a hero, their savior from the clutches of fear. But for Anderson, the killing of the rogue elephant was not a victory but a tragedy, a reminder of the delicate balance between man and nature. He had taken the life of a magnificent creature, a victim of circumstance, driven to violence by pain and isolation. The story of the rogue elephant of Panapatti is a stark reminder of the consequences of human encroachment on the natural world. It is a tale of destruction and loss, but also of courage and compassion, a testament to the enduring spirit of those who dare to venture into the wild, seeking not to conquer but to understand. Friends, next time I will come with another thrilling story by Kenneth Anderson. Till then, bye and take care. Please don't forget to like and subscribe my channel.